Hello everyone. My name is Thamali Carter. I'm the 31 years old, and I never imagined that the happiest day of gratitude in America would become the day my entire marriage collapsed. People often ask me when I finally stopped fighting for my husband. They assume it happened after the divorce papers were signed, or after the lawyers became involved, or after I moved halfway across the world with my son. They're wrong. The moment everything ended was much simpler than that. It happened when my husband looked me straight in the eyes and calmly said 5 words that changed my life forever. "Sir, pack your bags and leave." See, he thought he was throwing me out of his life. Instead, he unknowingly gave me permission to build a better one. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't leaving alone. I was taking the one person who mattered more than anything in this world. Our little boy. And before the Whitmore family understood what they had lost, they would discover that every lie they had spent years protecting was about to destroy them from the inside. This is my story. For almost 4 years I had convinced myself that marriage required sacrifice. Everyone says relationships are difficult. Every couple argues. Every family has problems. Those were the words I repeated to myself every time Mark's family humiliated me. Every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. I smiled. I apologized. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, because I believed protecting my son was more important than winning arguments. Looking back now, I realize silence has a dangerous price. The more I stayed quiet, the louder everyone else became. When Mark and I first met, he wasn't like the man he eventually became. He was thoughtful, kind, funny. He laughed with his whole body and made me believe that someone from 2 completely different worlds could build a beautiful life together. I grew up in a small town in New Zealand where my mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table. We never had much money. Our furniture didn't match. Vacations were impossible. The birthdays were simple homemade cakes with candles bought from the grocery store. But our home was full of love. Mark's family, on the other hand, had money. Generations of it. Large homes, country clubs, private schools, expensive vacations. They never openly said poor people were beneath them. They simply acted like it. The first time Diane Whitmore met me, she smiled politely before asking what my parents did for a living. When I answered honestly, she nodded slowly before saying, "Oh, how humble." At the time I thought she was simply awkward. I had no idea that single word would define the next several years of my life. Every visit became another reminder that I wasn't considered one of them. My accent sounded cute. My clothes were practical. My cooking was surprisingly acceptable. Everything sounded like a compliment until you listened carefully. Then you realized every sentence carried an invisible insult. Mark noticed. Sometimes he would squeeze my hand beneath the dinner table. Later he'd apologize. "They don't mean anything by it. They're old-fashioned. They'll come around." I believed him. Love has a strange way of making hope feel stronger than evidence. Then Noah was born. The day I held my son for the first time, I promised myself something. He would never grow up questioning whether he was loved. No matter what happened between the adults, he would always know he was enough. For a while, that promise seemed possible. Mark adored Noah. He woke up during midnight feedings. He changed diapers without complaining. He carried our son around the house singing songs completely off-key. Those memories are still real. That's what makes everything that happened later so painful. People rarely become strangers overnight. They disappear one compromise at a time. As Noah grew older, Diane became more involved. Too involved. She criticized everything. The preschool I chose, the food I cooked, the books I read to him. Even the way I hugged my own child. "You'll spoil him. You're making him soft. Little boys need discipline." Livery conversation somehow ended with her explaining why she knew better. Whenever I defended myself, Mark asked me to let it go. "She's just trying to help." That sentence slowly became the soundtrack of our marriage. When Brooke entered the picture, things became even worse. Unlike Diane, who hid her insults behind polite smiles, Brooke enjoyed humiliating people, especially me. She constantly joked that Mark had rescued me from poverty. She introduced me to friends as our family's charity project. Whenever I spoke, she interrupted. Whenever I succeeded, she minimized it. Whenever something went wrong, somehow it became my fault. The hardest part wasn't Brooke. Bullies exist everywhere. The hardest part was watching my husband pretend not to notice. Each time he stayed silent, Brooke became bolder. Richard, Mark's father, wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His disappointment filled entire rooms without raising his voice. Every conversation with him felt like a job interview I could never pass. He measured people by careers, by income, by family names, by reputation, and never by kindness, never by character. According to Richard, I would always be the woman who had married above her station. It didn't matter that I worked full time as a registered nurse. It didn't matter that I often worked 12 hour shifts before coming home to cook dinner and care for Noah. None of that counted, because in his mind, wealth wasn't earned. It was inherited. The years passed like that, tiny cuts, every week, every month until I barely recognized the confident woman I used to be. Still, I stayed, not because I was happy, because Noah loved his father. And despite everything, I believed Mark would eventually choose us over them. I kept waiting for that day. I didn't know that Thanksgiving would become the day I finally stopped waiting forever. That year, Diane insisted everyone gather at the family estate. Nearly 20 relatives filled the enormous dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath a massive chandelier. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. A laughter echoed from every corner. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Inside, everything was already broken. The Noah sat beside me wearing the tiny navy blue sweater my mother had mailed from New Zealand. He was only 3 years old, curious, gentle, always asking questions. He smiled at everyone, believing every adult in that room loved him. I wish that had been true. Dinner began peacefully enough. People talked about investments, vacation homes, politics, football, the things I rarely had anything to contribute to. I quietly cut Noah's turkey into tiny pieces while pretending not to notice Brooke watching me from across the table. She had that familiar smile, the one she wore whenever she planned to embarrass someone. I should have recognized the warning. Instead, I kept feeding my son, hoping we could survive one more family dinner without another scene. I had no idea that within the next few minutes, everything would explode. The first warning came from Brooke. She lifted her wine glass, smiled sweetly around the table, and looked directly at Noah before speaking. "You know," she said, "little Noah would probably have a much brighter future if he were raised by people who actually understand the Whitmore family standards." Several relatives laughed quietly. I froze. At first, I hoped I had misunderstood her. Then she continued. "After all," she said with a careless shrug, "children deserve stability. Not someone who's always one missed paycheck away from living in a trailer park again." The room suddenly became silent. Noah stopped chewing. His little eyes looked from Brooke to me, confused by the strange tension spreading across the table. He didn't understand the words, but children always understand emotions. He knew something was wrong. I slowly placed my fork on the table. Across from me, Diane lowered her eyes without saying a word. Richard calmly continued cutting his turkey as though nothing unusual had happened. Several cousins awkwardly looked away. Everyone knew Brooke had crossed the line. No one intended to stop her. Instead, they waited to see how I would react. I turned toward my husband. Mark still stared at his plate. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. My voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Please say something." For several long seconds, he remained completely still. Finally, without looking at me, he quietly muttered, "Let's not ruin Thanksgiving." My heart sank. Not because Brooke had insulted me. She had done that for years. What hurt was realizing my husband believed protecting dinner was more important than protecting his wife. I looked down at Noah. He wrapped both little arms around my waist. "Mama." His tiny voice trembled. "Why is Aunt Brooke mad?" That question shattered something inside me. I had spent years swallowing my pride. Years pretending insults didn't matter. Years convincing myself that peace was worth any sacrifice. But now those insults had reached my son. And that was a line no one would ever cross again. I slowly stood. Every chair around the table creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. But Brooke leaned back with a satisfied smile. She thought I was about to cry. Instead, I smiled. "You know what's interesting, Brooke?" She folded her arms confidently. "What? I finally understand why you've hated me all these years." Her smile disappeared.
Oh, really?
"Less. You've never cared that I grew up poor. You've never cared about my accent. You've never cared where I came from. You hated me because I accidentally discovered something you worked very hard to hide." For the first time that evening, Brooke looked nervous. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my handbag. My hands were steady, much steadier than I felt inside. For nearly 2 months I had carried those screenshots everywhere I went. At first, I had hoped I would never need them. I had wanted Brooke to admit the truth herself. Instead, she kept pretending I was the liar. I unlocked my phone, opened one folder, then another. Finally, I turned the screen toward the table. I found these while organizing Noah's education documents. Brooke's face instantly lost its color. Diane leaned forward. Richard finally stopped eating. Mark slowly looked up. On the screen were bank statements, transfer confirmations, account numbers, dates, amounts, and one email address. Brooke Whitmore. The room became so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "No," Brooke whispered. "That's impossible." I calmly zoomed in. $15,000. Transferred from Noah's college fund. 3 separate transactions. The confirmation emails were accidentally archived instead of deleted. Brooke jumped to her feet. That's fake. You made this. Didn't. Richard grabbed the phone from my hands. His confident expression disappeared within seconds. He checked each page, every transfer, every account number, every digital signature. His jaw tightened. Diane quickly walked around the table. She snatched the phone from Richard. For nearly a minute, nobody spoke. Brooke began breathing faster. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Finally, Diane looked up. What have you done? For one hopeful second, I believed she was talking to Brooke. Instead, she glared directly at me. How dare you bring this into my house? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, because it was unbelievable. Your daughter stole money from my son's future. And you're angry at me. Brooke immediately burst into fake tears. I was going to put it back. It was only temporary. I needed help. I was embarrassed. Richard slammed his fist onto the dining table. Crystal glasses rattled. Enough. Everyone froze. I looked at him. Surely he would finally demand the truth. Instead, he slowly pointed toward me. You've embarrassed this family. I stared at him in disbelief. I'm the one who embarrassed this family. His face hardened. This discussion ends now. No, I replied calmly. It doesn't. I picked up my phone again. There are more screenshots. There are emails. There are account histories. I've already made copies. Brooke's eyes widened with fear. Mark finally stood. For just one beautiful second, I believed he was finally choosing us. I imagined him walking beside me, taking my hand, looking at his sister and saying, "You stole from my son." But reality rarely follows hope. He slowly turned toward me instead. His face was cold. His voice was even colder. Emily. I waited. Apologize. The single word echoed through the room. I honestly wondered if I had heard him correctly. What? You embarrassed my parents. I stared at the man I had loved for nearly a decade. The money. I whispered. Our son's money. I don't care. He took one step closer. You should have handled this privately. I tried. You made a scene. They stole from Noah. They're still my family. The words hit harder than any slap ever could. They're still my family. The message hidden beneath them was painfully clear, and somehow, I wasn't. Brooke slowly smiled again. Diane crossed her arms. Richard nodded with quiet approval. Mark looked directly into my eyes. If you can't respect my family, he paused, then pack your bags and leave. The room fell completely silent. No one moved, no one breathed, no one expected what happened next. I looked down at Noah. He had buried his little face against my sweater. His tiny shoulders were shaking. He was frightened. Not because he understood money. Not because he understood betrayal. Because he understood one heartbreaking truth. His mother wasn't safe anymore. At that exact moment, every fear disappeared. The anger, the sadness, the disappointment. They were replaced by something much stronger, clarity. I gently lifted Noah into my arms. He wrapped both arms around my neck without saying a word. I looked at every person sitting around that table, one by one. Then my eyes settled on Mark. A calm smile slowly appeared on my face. All right, his eyebrows lifted. Right? You told me to leave. I nodded once. I will. Without another word, I walked toward the front door. No one stopped me. No one apologized. Behind me, I heard Diane whisper, "She'll be back tomorrow." Brooke laughed quietly. Richard poured himself another glass of bourbon. And Mark let me walk away. None of them realized they had just watched the last moment our family would ever be the same. By the time they understood what my quiet smile really meant, I would already be gone. The drive home was strangely quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while Noah slept in his car seat, still clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Every few minutes, I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. His cheeks were still stained with dried tears. Seeing them nearly broke me. For years, I had convinced myself that staying was the best decision for my son. That night proved how wrong I had been. Children don't need perfect families. They need peaceful homes. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was almost 10 o'clock. The house was dark. Mark hadn't come home. Of course he hadn't. He was probably still sitting comfortably at his parents' mansion while they congratulated themselves for putting me back in my place. They honestly believed I would cool down overnight, that tomorrow morning I would apologize, that I would beg for forgiveness, that life would return to normal. They didn't know me as well as they thought. I carried Noah upstairs without waking him. After changing him into his pajamas, I tucked him into bed and quietly sat beside him. He stirred slightly before opening his sleepy eyes. "I'm here. Are we going home tomorrow?" I gently brushed his curls away from his forehead. "We're already home." He looked around the room. "But Daddy isn't here." I forced myself to smile. "Daddy needs some time to think." He accepted the answer without another question. Children trust the people they love. I kissed his forehead. I love you more than anything. I love you too, Mama. Within seconds, he was asleep again. I remained beside his bed for almost an hour, not because I was tired, because I knew everything was about to change. Finally, I walked downstairs. The house felt different, not empty. Finished, I walked into the kitchen and quietly removed my wedding ring. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. That tiny circle of gold had once represented every promise we made: love, trust, respect, partnership. Somewhere along the way, only I had continued honoring those promises. I placed the ring on the counter. Then I opened my laptop. Months earlier, Mark had signed an international travel consent form. At the time, we had planned to visit my mother in Wellington after her heart surgery. The paperwork had been notarized. Everything had been approved. Then Diane announced a family weekend at their lake house. Suddenly, visiting my recovering mother became bad timing. Mark canceled our trip without even asking how I felt, but he never canceled the paperwork. The signed authorization was still valid. I opened the document again, read every line, confirmed every signature. Then I quietly whispered to myself, "This is our way out." I booked 2 one-way tickets, departure, 6:30 the following morning. There was no excitement, no feeling of victory, only determination. Next, I opened another folder. Inside were years of screenshots, cruel text messages, emails, photos, bank statements, medical records, voice recordings. I hadn't collected them to destroy anyone. I collected them because every time something terrible happened, people somehow convinced me it hadn't. "You imagined it. You're too emotional." That's not what was said. Eventually, I realized memories fade. Evidence doesn't. Everything went onto a portable hard drive, then another backup, then encrypted cloud storage. If anyone ever questioned my story, they would need to explain the documents first. At 4 o'clock in the morning, my alarm quietly vibrated. I hadn't slept. I stood in the darkness and began packing. Not everything. Only what mattered. Noah's clothes, his dinosaur, his favorite storybooks, both passports, birth certificates, medical records, my nursing license, the hard drive, the folder containing every financial document, a few family photographs of my mother. Everything else stayed behind. The expensive china Diane had proudly given us as a wedding gift, the crystal glasses, the designer furniture, the paintings, the jewelry, even my wedding album. None of those things could replace peace. When the final suitcase was zipped, I walked through every room one last time. There were so many memories, some beautiful, many painful. I didn't cry. I had already spent too many years crying inside that house. Before leaving, I picked up a small notepad. I wrote only one sentence. "You told me to pack my bags and leave." I listened, assured nothing more, nothing less. I placed the note beside my wedding ring. Then I picked up Noah, still asleep, still trusting me completely. Outside, the cold morning air hit my face. For a brief moment I hesitated. This was the point of no return. If I left now, everything would change forever. Then I looked at my son sleeping peacefully on my shoulder. The hesitation disappeared. As the city slowly woke behind us, we drove toward the airport. The roads were almost empty. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement. Soft music played through the speakers, but I barely heard it. My mind kept replaying the same sentence: "Pack your bags and leave." I almost laughed. Mark thought those words would scare me. Instead, they had set me free. At the airport, everything happened quickly. Check-in, security, immigration, one step after another. Every stamp on our passports felt like another door closing behind the life I was leaving. While waiting at our gate, Noah finally woke up. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and looked around. "Mama." "Yes, sweetheart. Are we going to Grandma's house?" I smiled. "Yes." His face immediately lit up. "The grandma with the big garden." "That's right. The one who makes pancakes shaped like dinosaurs." I laughed quietly. "The very same." He hugged his stuffed dinosaur tighter. I missed her, so did I. After a few seconds, he asked the question I had been expecting. "Is Daddy coming?" I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "No." "Is he mad?" I looked into his innocent little eyes. I refused to poison his heart with adult problems. Instead, I answered as honestly as I could. "Daddy has some things he needs to figure out." Noah simply nodded. Then he reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm with you?" 3 simple words. They gave me more strength than anyone would ever know. A few minutes later, our flight was called. As we walked through the boarding gate, I glanced back one final time. No security officers were running toward us. No angry husband appeared. No dramatic chase through the airport. Only strangers beginning another ordinary morning. When the airplane finally lifted above the clouds, I looked out the window as America slowly disappeared beneath us. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. Toward safety. Toward dignity. toward a future where my son would never again wonder why the people who claimed to love him made his mother cry. I had no idea what waited for us in New Zealand. But for the first time in years, the unknown felt far less frightening than staying had ever been. When the plane landed in Wellington, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, my shoulders didn't hurt. I hadn't even noticed how tense my body had become while living with the Whitmores. The constant criticism, the endless arguments, the feeling that I had to measure every word before speaking, it had become so normal that I forgot what peace actually felt like. As Noah and I walked through customs, I spotted my mother waiting near the arrivals gate. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her gray hair had become thinner after her surgery. But the second our eyes met, she smiled exactly the way she always had, like I was still her little girl coming home from school. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms. I hugged her tighter than I had hugged anyone in years. Then Noah ran straight into her embrace. "Grandma. There you are, my handsome boy." Watching the two people I loved most laughing together almost brought me to tears. For a few precious minutes, the rest of the world disappeared. My mother's house wasn't large. It sat near the edge of Wellington, overlooking rolling green hills that stretched toward the sea. The furniture was old. The kitchen was tiny. The wallpaper desperately needed replacing. But every room felt warm, safe. No one criticized the way I dressed. No one judged how much money I earned. No one measured my worth by the family I married into. That first night after Noah had fallen asleep, my mother quietly made 2 cups of tea. We sat together on the back porch listening to the wind. Finally, she spoke. "You don't have to pretend with me." Those words broke something inside me. For nearly an hour, I cried harder than I ever had before. Not because I missed Mark, because I finally felt safe enough to stop pretending I was okay. When I finished telling her everything, the insults, the stolen college fund, the Thanksgiving dinner, Mark choosing his parents, she remained silent for a long time. Finally, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've been waiting for this day." I looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I've been waiting for the day you finally chose yourself." The next morning my phone exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, emails, text messages. 7 missed calls from Mark, 14 from Diane, 8 from Richard, 9 from Brooke. I ignored every one of them. Instead, I made breakfast with Noah. We ate pancakes shaped like dinosaurs exactly as Grandma had promised. For the first time in months, he laughed without looking over his shoulder. That laugh reminded me why I had left. Not to punish Mark, to protect my son. Later that afternoon, I finally opened the messages. Mark's first voicemail sounded angry. "Emily, where are you?" The second sounded confused. "Please answer your phone." By the 10th message, he sounded frightened. "This isn't funny." The 20th message simply repeated my name, over and over. The final voicemail was different. "Please, just tell me Noah is okay." I closed my phone. I wasn't ready to answer. Not until I had legal protection. The following morning, I met with an experienced family lawyer in Wellington. I handed her every document I had brought. The passports, the travel consent, Noah's dual citizenship papers, the screenshots, the financial records, every threatening message. She spent nearly an hour reviewing everything. Finally, she looked at me. "You planned this very carefully. I hoped I'd never need it." She smiled gently. "That preparation may have just protected your son." Then she explained something I hadn't fully understood. Because there was no existing custody order, because Mark had voluntarily signed the travel authorization, because Noah legally held New Zealand citizenship, and because I had immediately sought legal advice instead of disappearing, my situation was far stronger than I feared. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I allowed myself to breathe. Still, one legal opinion wasn't enough. Later that afternoon I spoke with an American attorney through a video conference. He reviewed the same evidence. His conclusion surprised me even more. "You did not kidnap your child. You exercised a legal travel authorization. Everything now depends on family court, not threats from your in-laws." Those words changed everything. For days I had secretly feared that police officers might suddenly appear at my mother's door. Now, that fear slowly disappeared. The lawyers advised me to stop speaking directly with Mark. Every conversation should happen through legal counsel. Everything should be documented. Everything should remain professional. I agreed immediately. That evening, I wrote exactly one email. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry, it simply stated the facts. The phrase "Noah and I are safe," as future communication will take place through our attorneys. Tacit attached are copies of the financial records regarding Noah's education account, along with evidence of repeated harassment from members of your family. I press any additional threats will become part of the custody proceedings. Emily, I copied both lawyers. Then I pressed send. 6 long hours passed, nothing, no calls, no emails, no messages. Then, just before midnight, one reply appeared, only 2 words. Call me. I stared at the screen. Months earlier, I would have called immediately. I would have apologized. I would have begged him to understand. Not anymore. Instead, I typed a short response. Ras, any conversation must include both attorneys and be recorded. I expected him to refuse. Instead, 13 minutes later, he agreed. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. I barely slept that night. Not because I feared Mark. Because I knew this conversation would determine what kind of father he intended to become. Would he continue protecting his parents, or would he finally face the truth? The next afternoon, I entered a conference room inside the law office. My New Zealand attorney sat beside me. My American attorney appeared on a large monitor through secure video conference. Every document was neatly organized in front of us. Across the world. Another camera connected. The screen flickered. Then Mark appeared. He looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His beard had grown. He looked nothing like the confident man who had ordered me to leave only a few days earlier. But he wasn't alone. Exactly as I had expected, Diane sat beside him. Richard stood silently behind the sofa. And Brooke lingered near the fireplace. Even now, they still believed they could control the conversation. Diane leaned toward the camera first. "Where's my grandson?" I calmly answered. "He's safe. You had no right to take him." Before I could respond, my attorney spoke. "My client acted under a valid notarized travel authorization signed by Mr. Whitmore." Deanne's expression changed immediately. She hadn't known that. Richard looked toward Mark. Mark slowly lowered his eyes. That single reaction told me everything. He remembered signing the paperwork. And now he realized the biggest mistake he'd ever made wasn't signing that document. It was giving me a reason to finally use it. I looked directly into the camera. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of anyone sitting on the other side. The balance of power had changed. And everyone in that room could feel it. The conference room became completely silent. For several long seconds, no one spoke, no one moved. Everyone on the screen seemed to be waiting for someone else to take control. For years, that had always been Diane, but today was different. Today, facts mattered more than opinions. My attorney calmly broke the silence. "Mrs. Whitmore, before anyone continues, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. We expect respectful communication." Diane forced a smile. Of course. It was the same smile she had worn for years whenever she pretended to be the victim. I knew it well. She turned back toward the camera. "Emily, sweetheart, you've made your point. Now bring Noah home." The sweetheart. She hadn't called me that in years. Not since before the wedding. People often think manipulators always sound angry. The truth is much more dangerous. Sometimes they sound loving, especially when they're losing control. I looked directly into the camera. "No." Her smile disappeared. Richard folded his arms. Brooke rolled her eyes dramatically. Mark simply stared at me. I continued. "My son is finally sleeping through the night. My son is laughing again. My son no longer has to watch adults humiliate his mother during dinner. I won't take that peace away from him." Diane's voice became sharp. "You're turning him against us?" "No," I answered calmly. "Your actions did that." My attorney nodded toward me. "If necessary," she said, "we're prepared to present additional evidence." I slowly connected my laptop to the conference room display. One folder appeared. Us Whitmore family evidence. Another click. Dozens of files filled the screen. Photos, emails, voice recordings, text messages, medical reports, financial statements. Every document had been organized by date. For years I had quietly documented everything, not because I wanted revenge. Because deep inside, I always feared one day I would need to prove I wasn't imagining the abuse. My attorney opened the first folder. A recording. Diane's voice filled both conference rooms. "If a woman like Emily should be grateful my son married beneath himself." Silence. Another recording. Brooke laughed. "She'll never leave. Women like her always need someone else's money." Say another. Richard speaking to Mark. "Your wife embarrasses this family every time she opens her mouth." No one interrupted. No one claimed the recordings were fake. Because they couldn't. Each file contained dates, locations, original metadata. The evidence spoke for itself. Then came the financial records. Transfer 1, $5,000. Transfer 2, $5,000. Transfer 3, $5,000. Every dollar taken from Noah's education account. Every transaction linked to Brooke's personal account. My American attorney looked directly toward Brooke. "Would you like to explain these transfers before legal action begins?" Brooke's confidence finally cracked. Her breathing became uneven. She looked desperately toward her parents. Neither of them spoke. She turned toward Mark. He didn't rescue her either. Finally she whispered, I needed the money. My attorney remained calm. So you admit taking it? Tears filled Brooke's eyes. I was going to pay it back. When? She couldn't answer. The silence was louder than any confession. Richard finally spoke. We'll repay the money. That isn't enough. My attorney's voice remained steady. The issue isn't only repayment, it's fraud. It's financial misconduct involving a minor. It's evidence relevant to future custody proceedings. For the first time, fear appeared on Richard's face. Real fear, not anger. Then Diane tried one last time. She leaned toward the camera.
Emily, we're family. No.
I answered softly. Family doesn't spend years destroying someone's confidence. Family doesn't steal from a child. Family doesn't teach a little boy that disrespect is normal. Her eyes filled with tears. Whether they were real or not, I no longer cared. Then something happened that I never expected. Mark spoke not to me, to his parents. Stop. And everyone turned toward him. He slowly stood from the couch. His hands trembled. For several moments, he simply stared at the floor. Then he looked directly at Diane. She was telling the truth. No one breathed. I knew you treated Emily unfairly. I told myself it wasn't serious. I kept asking her to be patient. I asked her to apologize when she had done nothing wrong. His voice began breaking. Sandandian immediately interrupted. Mark. No. He raised his hand. For once, please let me finish. The room fell silent again. He turned toward me. His eyes were red. I kept choosing the family I was born into, instead of the family I promised to protect. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am sorry. The words hung in the air. The years earlier, they would have been enough. Today they weren't. I nodded slowly. I believe you're sorry. Hope briefly appeared on his face. Then I continued. But being sorry doesn't erase years of silence. It doesn't erase what Noah witnessed. It doesn't erase the fear he felt. Mark closed his eyes. You told me to pack my bags. I did. You watched me leave. You didn't stop me. Another painful silence followed. Finally he whispered. I thought you'd come back, I know, and that's exactly why I didn't. My attorney gently pushed a parenting proposal across the table. The decision now is simple. If the Whitmore wishes to remain part of Noah's life, that relationship must be rebuilt. Through actions. Not promises. Mark nodded immediately. I'll do whatever it takes. The following weeks proved whether those words meant anything. Brooke returned every dollar she had stolen, with interest. A written admission accompanied the repayment. Her attorney negotiated to avoid criminal prosecution. I accepted repayment, but the documentation remained part of the custody file forever. Richard never contacted me again. Whether it was pride or shame, I never discovered. Diane attempted several handwritten apology letters. Some blamed stress, some blamed misunderstanding, some blamed everyone except herself. I never replied, not because I hated her, because my healing no longer depended on her understanding what she had done. Mark surprised everyone. He enrolled in therapy. He moved out of his parents' home. He attended parenting classes voluntarily. Every scheduled video call with Noah happened exactly on time. Never once did he pressure our son. Never once did he criticize me. Month after month, he slowly became the father Noah deserved, not the husband I once needed, but a better father. That mattered. Almost a year later, our divorce became final. It wasn't celebrated. It wasn't dramatic. It simply marked the official end of a chapter that had already closed long before. Noah started press school near Wellington Harbor. Every morning we walked together beside the ocean. He laughed as seagulls chased pieces of bread across the sand. Sometimes he talked excitedly about speaking with his dad on the weekend. Sometimes he didn't. Both were okay. Children don't measure love by court documents. They measure it by consistency, by safety, by who shows up. People still ask me whether I regret leaving America, whether I regret ending my marriage, whether I regret buying those one-way tickets. The answer has never changed. I don't regret leaving. I only regret believing for so many years that staying was the same thing as loving someone. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't that revenge feels satisfying. It was something much simpler. Walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes, walking away is the first step toward finally finding your way home. And on the night my husband told me to pack my bags, neither of us realized. He wasn't ending my life. He was unknowingly giving me back my future. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of my story. Looking back, I realized this journey was never just about a broken marriage or a difficult family. It was about finding the courage to stop accepting disrespect as a normal part of love. For years, I believed that staying silent would keep my family together. Instead, my silence only gave others permission to treat me, and eventually my son, with less respect than we deserved. The night my husband told me to pack my bags, I thought I had lost everything. I thought I was walking away from my home, my marriage, and the future I had worked so hard to build. But as time passed, I discovered that I hadn't lost my life at all. I had simply left behind a place where I was never truly valued. Leaving wasn't easy. There were moments filled with fear, uncertainty, loneliness, and doubt. I questioned myself more times than I can count. But every morning I saw my son smiling without fear, sleeping peacefully through the night, and growing up in a home filled with kindness instead of criticism. I knew I had made the right decision. Justice didn't arrive through anger or revenge alone. It came through truth, preparation, and the courage to stand up for myself. The evidence exposed every lie. The legal system protected my son. The people who believed they could control my future were finally forced to face the consequences of their own actions. As for Mark, I don't hate him. I believe he truly regrets the choices he made. But love cannot survive without respect, and trust cannot be rebuilt with apologies alone. Sometimes people change too late to save a marriage, but not too late to become better parents. I'm grateful that Noah now has a father who is trying to earn his place in his son's life through actions, instead of empty promises. Today, our lives are peaceful. Noah is growing into a kind, confident young boy. My mother has regained her health, and our little home in New Zealand is filled with laughter, warmth, and hope. We don't have the biggest house or the most expensive things, but we have something far more valuable. We have peace. If there's one lesson I hope you take away from my story, it's this: never allow anyone to convince you that your worth depends on their approval. Real family doesn't humiliate you. Real love doesn't demand your silence. Respect should never be treated as a reward. It should be the foundation of every relationship. And if someone ever gives you the choice between protecting your dignity or protecting their pride, always choose your dignity. It may be the hardest decision you'll ever make, but it could also become the beginning of the happiest chapter of your life. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to my story. I truly hope it encouraged someone who may be facing a difficult situation to believe that a better future is possible. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more powerful, real, life-inspired stories about courage, betrayal, justice, and new beginnings, please support the channel by clicking the like button, subscribing, and turning on the KISS notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you would have done if you were in my position. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay strong, and remember this: sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer, it's building a life so peaceful that their betrayal no longer has the power to hurt you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.